For decades, Sean P. Diddy Combs stood as a symbol of the music and entertainment world, a mogul whose influence reached far beyond hip-hop. Known for his lavish parties, extravagant lifestyle, and star-studded events, Diddy seemed to embody the ultimate celebrity dream. But as the recent indictment reveals, beneath this glamorous facade lies a disturbing world of coercion, exploitation, and abuse. The details unveiled are not only shocking, but also paint a picture of a life that is a stark contrast to the public image Diddy has curated over the years. The indictment is a 14-page expose that has rocked both the entertainment industry and the public at large. It outlines in vivid detail the events known as freak-off parties, providing a glimpse into a world that was hidden from view for over a decade. Let's explore the 9 most shocking details as they unravel not just a series of acts, but an entire lifestyle allegedly built on manipulation and power. 1. The end of the white parties and the rise of freak-off gatherings. Between 2004 and 2009, Sean P. Diddy Combs hosted what became known as the famed white parties, celebrated in lavish settings with A-list celebrities, music industry moguls, and influencers. These parties were the epitome of opulence and status, synonymous with the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Each year, guests would arrive dressed in white, participating in what seemed to be the social event of the summer. The Hamptons, New York, where these parties were often held, played the perfect backdrop for Diddy's display of luxury, extravagance, and a carefully curated public persona. However, the curtain closed on these parties in 2009. As Diddy's white parties faded into the background, a much darker scene was set to emerge: the rise of what the indictment against him calls freak-off parties. According to the indictment, these events began around the same time the white parties ended and were vastly different in both character and purpose. These gatherings were multi-day sex marathons, clandestine and closely guarded by Diddy's inner circle. They were not social parties, but rather private, highly orchestrated events held behind closed doors and away from public view. The nature of the freak-off parties is markedly explicit and disturbing. The indictment alleges that Diddy meticulously planned these events, organizing and directing the sexual performances that took place. Far from being mere celebrations, these parties were essentially orchestrated sex gatherings attended by both commercial sex workers and individuals coerced into participating. The indictment highlights that Diddy maintained a high level of control over these events, ensuring that the parties catered to his desires while asserting dominance over the victims involved. The secrecy surrounding these freak-off gatherings was deliberate. The indictment paints a picture of a highly calculated environment where Diddy, with the assistance of his associates, would carefully curate the conditions for the parties. Unlike the publicized nature of the white parties, which thrived on media coverage and celebrity status, the freak-off parties were designed to be discreet. Attendees were handpicked, and only those within Diddy's most trusted circles were allowed to participate or even know of their existence. The role of commercial sex workers in these parties was significant. The indictment reveals that sex workers were transported across state lines and internationally for these events, suggesting a well-coordinated and far-reaching operation. But it wasn't just willing participants who attended. Many victims were coerced through a combination of manipulation, threats, and control over their careers or personal lives. This element of coercion raises questions about the level of power and influence Diddy held over the people around him, and how that power was allegedly used to exploit and control them during these parties. These parties reportedly lasted for days and were not merely impromptu get-togethers, but orchestrated events that required planning, preparation, and coordination. Diddy's associates, according to the indictment, played a role in arranging the necessary venues, ensuring the presence of required supplies like drugs and sex paraphernalia, and managing the logistics to ensure that these gatherings were kept under wraps. Ultimately, the transition from the public glamorous white parties to the hidden and disturbing freak-off gatherings marks a significant shift in Diddy's social life and alleged activities. What was once a world of elite, high-profile social gatherings gave way to something far more controversial and damaging, a pattern of behavior rooted in secrecy, exploitation, and abuse of power. The indictment's revelations cast a shadow over Diddy's public persona, peeling back the layers of fame to reveal a hidden world rife with scandal and controversy. 2. Coercion and control over victims. The indictment against Sean P. Diddy Combs contains disturbing allegations about how he maintained control over his victims, primarily through coercion, manipulation, and intimidation. These alleged methods of coercion form the backbone of the freak-off parties, ensuring compliance and obedience from individuals brought into Diddy's circle. The indictment lays out how Diddy's strategies were multifaceted, employing psychological pressure, threats, and exploitation of power to manipulate his victims. One of the most disturbing accusations is that Diddy would lure potential victims into his orbit under the guise of romantic interest. These individuals were often led to believe they were entering consensual relationships or partnerships with Diddy, only to find themselves caught in a web of control that was difficult to escape. Once they were entangled in his sphere of influence, Diddy allegedly forced them to participate in prolonged sex acts with male commercial sex workers at his orchestrated freak-off parties. The indictment claims these events were not merely random encounters, but were premeditated and controlled, with Diddy dictating the nature and duration of the activities that took place. What is particularly troubling is the pattern of coercion alleged in the indictment. It details how victims were subjected to various forms of abuse, including physical threats, verbal intimidation, and career manipulation. The implication was clear. Refusing to participate in the freak-off parties or speaking out against Diddy's demands would result in severe consequences. These consequences could range from reputational harm to outright physical violence, leaving the victims with limited options and a feeling of powerlessness. The indictment presents Diddy as a figure who wielded his power not only to dominate the entertainment industry, but also to assert total control over those who came into contact with him. The control allegedly extended beyond the parties themselves. According to the indictment, Diddy maintained a tight grip on his victims' lives, leveraging his status and influence to dictate their actions, appearance, and professional opportunities. This level of control made it almost impossible for the victims to break free from his grasp, as they were continuously threatened with damage to their careers, financial stability, and personal reputations. The indictment paints a portrait of Diddy as someone who would go to great lengths to maintain control over his victims, using not only his wealth and power, but also intimidation and fear. The concept of career manipulation is particularly alarming in the context of Diddy's industry stature. Given his significant influence in the music and entertainment world, many victims may have seen him as a gatekeeper to success. The prospect of being blackballed or denied opportunities for refusing to comply with his demands created an environment where victims felt forced to submit. The indictment suggests that Diddy exploited this fear to keep his victims compliant, ensuring that they would continue to participate in his gatherings and keep his secrets. Beyond threats and intimidation, the indictment also highlights instances of psychological manipulation. The victims allegedly experienced not only coercion to partake in sexual activities, but also emotional abuse meant to undermine their self-worth and make them more malleable to Diddy's control. Verbal abuse, shaming, and belittling were among the tactics used to break down the victims' resistance and ensure that they remained obedient to his demands. What makes these allegations even more unsettling is the systematic nature of the abuse described in the indictment. This was not an isolated incident or a moment of poor judgment. It is presented as a calculated pattern of behavior spanning over a decade. The extent of the planning and the measures taken to ensure compliance suggest a level of premeditation and intent to maintain a system of exploitation that operated within Diddy's larger media and entertainment empire. The indictment underscores how Diddy's status and resources gave him the ability to manipulate and exploit those around him. It paints a picture of a figure who was not only a successful music mogul, but also a man who allegedly used his position of power to dominate and control victims for personal gratification. These revelations cast a dark shadow on his public image and raise important questions about the abuse of power within celebrity circles. 3. The use of drugs to subdue and manipulate. The indictment against Sean P. Diddy Combs goes into great detail about the alleged use of drugs to maintain control over the victims at his freak-off parties. These gatherings were more than just private events. They reportedly involved the deliberate distribution of a mix of controlled substances to keep participants compliant and easily manipulated. The indictment suggests that Diddy used a combination of ketamine, ecstasy, and gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a substance commonly known as the date rape drug, to facilitate the sexual activities that took place during these parties. The drugs were allegedly used to ensure that victims remained obedient and compliant throughout the duration of the parties, which sometimes lasted multiple days. These substances are known for their ability to lower inhibitions and impair judgment, making it difficult for victims to resist or challenge what was happening. By providing these drugs, Diddy is said to have established an environment where participants were in an altered state, less able to recognize or refuse the coercive acts that took place. One of the particularly unsettling aspects of these allegations is how the use of drugs was seemingly premeditated and calculated to maintain control. The indictment implies that Diddy and his team made these substances readily available, ensuring that they were a fundamental component of the freak-off parties. This systematic distribution of drugs wasn't just for entertainment or party enhancement, but was reportedly aimed at subduing victims and maintaining an atmosphere where they could be easily coerced into participating in prolonged sex acts. To further emphasize the level of planning and control involved, the indictment describes how Diddy and his victims would receive IV fluids after the parties to recover from the physical exertion and rampant drug use. This suggests that the physical toll of the parties was anticipated and managed in a highly organized way. The use of IV fluids indicates that Diddy not only facilitated the drug use during the events, but also took steps to help participants recover so they could continue their involvement or avoid suspicion afterward. This measure adds another layer of control and further underscores the orchestrated nature of the events. The alleged combination of drugs and their strategic use as tools for manipulation and control paint a dark picture of how Diddy supposedly maintained a grip over his victims. The choice of substances, including ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB, highlights the extent to which the victims' mental and physical states were altered to keep them compliant and vulnerable to exploitation. Overall, the use of drugs as described in the indictment reveals a calculated effort to manipulate the victim's ability to consent, function, and remember. It raises critical concerns about the abuse of power, consent, and the coercion that allegedly took place within these secretive and highly orchestrated events. For recording of events and use of hidden cameras. One of the most alarming elements detailed in the indictment against Sean P. Diddy Combs is the alleged use of hidden cameras to record the freak-off parties. These events were not only carefully orchestrated, but were reportedly also meticulously documented without the knowledge or consent of the participants. Federal agents who raided Diddy's Miami residence discovered rooms specifically designed for sexual activity, equipped with hidden recording devices to capture the events from multiple angles. According to the indictment, Diddy allegedly kept video footage of the sexual acts performed during these parties, using it as a tool for control and manipulation. The recordings served a dual purpose. On one hand, they provided Diddy with entertainment. The indictment claims that he would often masturbate while watching the footage. On the other hand, the videos acted as blackmail, ensuring the continued participation of the victims in future parties. The fear of exposure and potential damage to their reputation reportedly made victims too terrified to speak out or refuse further involvement in Diddy's events. This level of surveillance is one of the more egregious violations highlighted in the indictment. It is not only a severe breach of privacy, but also represents a sophisticated method of coercion. Victims were not only subjected to sexual exploitation, but were also filmed in compromising positions, creating an environment where they felt trapped and powerless. The knowledge that they were being recorded without their consent and that these recordings could be used as leverage to maintain control added a layer of psychological manipulation and distress. The existence of these hidden cameras and recorded footage points to a deliberate and systematic approach to maintaining power over the victims, suggesting that these parties were carefully pre-planned to ensure continued control over those involved. This level of planning and the use of recordings to instill fear and compliance highlight the deep-seated issues of abuse, power, and control central to the allegations in the indictment. 5. The orchestrated logistics behind freak-off parties. The indictment against Sean P. Diddy Combs reveals that the freak-off parties were not impromptu or casual gatherings. They were systematically planned, orchestrated, and executed with the involvement of multiple people. It wasn't just Diddy at the center of these events. His staff and business associates reportedly played active roles in ensuring the party's smooth operation from start to finish. According to the indictment, these individuals were responsible for managing the logistics that were essential to the freak-off parties. Venues were booked in advance, which often included hotels that could accommodate Diddy's demands. These locations were then prepared with all the necessary supplies for the events, which allegedly included controlled substances, copious amounts of baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and specialized lighting to create the desired atmosphere. The environment was meticulously crafted to ensure that the sexual activities could occur without interruption or discomfort, highlighting a premeditated approach to these parties. The level of coordination and the variety of supplies indicate that the events were well-planned and not spontaneous. The substances and materials required to host these parties were reportedly brought in by Diddy's associates, who were also responsible for keeping the gatherings well-stocked throughout the multi-day festivities. This level of detail reveals a systematic effort to maintain the ambiance and functionality of the freak-off parties, allowing them to run seamlessly over long periods. Moreover, once the parties concluded, Diddy's team played a critical role in the cleanup operations. They would work to ensure that no trace of the events was left behind, carefully erasing any evidence of the activities that took place. This thorough cleanup process involved removing all the supplies, managing room damage, and making sure that no clues were left that might expose the nature of these secretive gatherings. The orchestration of the parties speaks to a deeply ingrained system of secrecy and control. Every aspect of the freak-off events, from venue selection to supply provision and post-party cleanup, was managed with a high degree of precision to prevent leaks and maintain privacy. The involvement of staff and associates illustrates that these were not merely casual parties, but rather calculated operations designed to serve Diddy's purposes and ensure that participants complied with his expectations. The meticulous nature of these preparations and the involvement of multiple parties underscore how the events were part of a larger, organized system. The goal was to create an environment where Diddy could exercise control, and the lengths to which his team went to secure, maintain, and later sanitize the locations show the seriousness and scale of the alleged activities. 6. Evidence seized during federal raids. In March 2023, federal authorities executed dramatic raids on Sean P. Diddy Combs' properties in Miami and Los Angeles, seizing an array of items that cast a spotlight on the nature of his alleged freak-off parties. The evidence gathered from these raids is extensive and alarming, including large quantities of narcotics, firearms, and items that appear to be directly linked to the alleged sexual gatherings. The inventory of freak-off supplies alone was staggering. Authorities reportedly found more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, a volume that not only points to the scale of the parties, but also suggests they were regular and well-stocked events. The sheer quantity of these materials supports the accusations that the gatherings were premeditated and large-scale, with extensive preparation to facilitate multi-day sexual activities. The supplies seized from the raids underscore how these parties were not isolated incidents, but rather part of an organized and recurring pattern. Additionally, the discovery of firearms, including AR-15 rifles with defaced serial numbers and accompanying ammunition, adds a level of severity and danger to the case. The presence of these weapons raises questions about the methods used to maintain control and security at the freak-off parties. The indictment hints at a potential underlying environment of intimidation and force, suggesting that the firearms may have played a role in ensuring the compliance and silence of those involved. The combination of controlled substances and weapons found during the raids paints a picture of a lifestyle steeped in both illegal activity and coercion. While the drugs are said to have been used to keep participants compliant during the parties, the firearms suggest the ability and willingness to enforce power and maintain order through the threat of violence if necessary. This evidence seized during the federal raids is crucial to understanding the full extent of Diddy's alleged activities and the logistics of the freak-off parties, underscoring the level of planning, scale, and potential danger that characterize these events. 7. Physical violence and threats of intimidation. The indictment reveals multiple instances where Diddy is accused of using force and fear to manipulate victims into participating in his freak-off parties and keeping them silent afterward. These allegations point to an environment where verbal threats were not just words, but were often backed by physical harm and real consequences. In one particularly harrowing account, a victim was reportedly hidden away for several days to recover from injuries allegedly inflicted by Diddy. This instance of violence underscores the extreme lengths to which Diddy is accused of going to maintain dominance over his victims. The allegation implies that physical harm was not just a threat, but a reality, and that recovery had to occur out of sight to maintain secrecy and avoid raising suspicion about what was happening behind closed doors. Furthermore, Diddy is accused of employing a range of intimidating behaviors beyond physical violence. The indictment outlines how he would track victims' locations, control their appearances, and wield threats to their careers and personal lives if they did not comply with his demands. For victims in the entertainment industry, where Diddy's influence and connections were extensive, the fear of career sabotage or public humiliation added a psychological layer to the control he allegedly exerted. The threat of reputational damage or the loss of professional opportunities created an atmosphere where victims felt compelled to participate in the freak-off parties or submit to his demands. These acts of intimidation were multifaceted, working on both physical and emotional levels. The fear instilled in the victims was a crucial factor in keeping them compliant, creating a cycle of abuse that left them with little choice but to obey. The combination of physical violence, threats, and career manipulation not only maintained Diddy's dominance, but also ensured that the victims felt trapped, unable to escape or speak out without risking severe repercussions to their safety or livelihoods. The allegations of violence and intimidation highlight how Diddy is accused of maintaining power over his victims through a mix of coercion, psychological manipulation, and outright physical control, creating a deeply abusive and oppressive environment. 8. Racketeering, drug possession, and wider criminal allegations. Beyond the allegations of abuse tied to the freak-off parties, Sean P. Diddy Combs faces severe charges of racketeering and drug possession. The indictment paints a broader picture of Diddy's alleged involvement in a criminal enterprise that extends well beyond organizing illicit parties. These charges include accusations of possessing and distributing a variety of narcotics, substances that were reportedly key to enabling the abusive behaviors described in the indictment. The list of drugs mentioned in the indictment is extensive and varied, suggesting a large-scale operation. These substances include cocaine, oxycodone, alprazolam, commonly known as Xanax, MDMA, ecstasy, Nexus, a synthetic psychedelic, GHB, a known date rape drug, and ketamine. The combination of these drugs implies their strategic use during the freak-off parties to impair victims' judgment, lower inhibitions, and facilitate the prolonged sex acts that allegedly took place. The indictment suggests that Diddy's possession of these drugs was not for personal use alone, but included the intent to distribute them to maintain control over his victims and ensure compliance with his demands. The racketeering charges add another layer of complexity, indicating that Diddy was not acting independently, but as part of a wider criminal network. Racketeering, often associated with organized crime, suggests that Diddy's actions were systematic and part of a sustained effort to support illegal activities. The indictment suggests that Diddy's media and entertainment empire acted as a front for these activities, masking the criminal conduct behind the guise of business dealings and celebrity lifestyle. This broader criminal enterprise is presented as a means for Diddy to maintain power, control, and influence over those around him, not only enabling the alleged abuse at the parties, but also providing a structure through which he could exercise authority. By allegedly leveraging his industry status and resources, Diddy is portrayed as a figure who used his business operations to facilitate illegal activities, exploiting the network of his associates to support and hide the extent of the crimes. These racketeering and drug possession charges suggest that the alleged activities were part of a coordinated and deliberate effort to maintain power, not just isolated incidents. The inclusion of these charges in the indictment extends the scope of the case from individual acts of exploitation to a criminal operation embedded within the broader framework of Diddy's business and social circle. The indictment's portrayal of Diddy as part of a larger criminal scheme emphasizes how his actions allegedly went beyond personal misconduct to systemic abuse facilitated by a network of enablers and illegal activities. 9. Diddy's response in the road to trial. In light of the severe allegations against him, Sean P. Diddy Combs has vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Through his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, Diddy has argued that the charges brought against him are the result of an unjust prosecution, and his legal team maintains that the indictment has distorted the truth. The defense emphasizes Diddy's long-standing reputation as a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist. By highlighting these aspects of his public persona, the defense team aims to shift the narrative and cast doubt on the validity of the accusations. Agnifilo has also pointed out that Diddy has been cooperative throughout the investigation and voluntarily relocated to New York in anticipation of the charges. The attorney urges the public to withhold judgment until all the facts come to light, asserting that Diddy is determined to clear his name in court. This approach underscores a confidence in the legal process and a belief that the evidence will eventually exonerate him. Despite Diddy's defense, the severity of the charges cannot be overstated. The indictment covers a wide range of serious offenses, from racketeering and drug possession to allegations of physical violence, coercion, and exploitation. If found guilty on all counts, Diddy faces the possibility of spending decades behind bars, which would mark a dramatic fall from grace for one of the entertainment industry's most influential figures. For someone who has built an empire in music, fashion, and media, a conviction would not only end his career, but could also reshape the narrative around his legacy. As Diddy prepares to face trial, the case has already garnered significant media attention. The proceedings promise to be among the most closely watched legal battles in recent memory, with the potential to influence public perceptions of power, celebrity culture, and abuse within the entertainment industry. Given the complexity of the charges and the high-profile nature of those involved, the trial's outcome could have lasting implications not only for Diddy, but for the broader music and entertainment landscape. The case will likely serve as a critical moment in examining how figures of power and fame are held accountable for alleged abuses within their domains. The indictment against P. Diddy has peeled back the curtain on a life that was far darker than the public could have imagined. The revelations of exploitation, coercion, and abuse paint a grim picture of a star whose private actions stand in stark contrast to his public image. This case not only challenges the myth of the celebrity lifestyle, but also sparks a larger conversation about power dynamics and the vulnerability of those who are drawn into the orbit of influential figures. As the legal proceedings continue, and as more details emerge, the world will watch closely to see how the story of Sean P. Diddy Combs unfolds. This saga serves as a reminder that even in the brightest lights of fame, shadows can hide. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and for supporting our channel. If you found this content insightful, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment to let us know your thoughts. And of course, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring more content like this to you, so stay tuned for more exciting videos coming soon. Thanks for being a part of our community, and we'll see you in the next video.